I stood in front of the mirror in my small new country home, brushing away tears that slipped down my cheeks. At 69, after decades of stretching every dollar and sacrificing every personal wish, I had finally done something just for myself. This wasn't just a house. It was the first thing in my entire life that was completely mine. The air still carried the scent of fresh paint and pine wood. Morning sunlight filtered through lace curtains I'd found at a thrift shop, scattering soft patterns across the floor. Outside, sparrows hopped along the garden fence, chirping as if welcoming me. I touched the cream-colored wall and whispered, "This is my freedom." I thought of Harold, my husband of 45 years, who passed away 2 summers ago. He had been kind but traditional, convinced our money should go toward the children and never toward luxuries for us. He left me with love and memories, but also a life of self-denial. When I signed the papers for this house, I felt his presence, almost as if he was smiling at me for finally choosing myself. I had saved for decades, piecing together $5 bills slipped from grocery money, sewing clothes instead of buying new ones, skipping every vacation. My total nest egg came to just over $6,200. The house had been a foreclosure, small and worn, but it spoke to me. The realtor warned me about the creaky floorboards and the outdated wiring. I didn't care. It was sturdy, quiet, and mine. That morning I unpacked my meager belongings, hand-me-down furniture, Harold's old rocking chair, a shoebox filled with photos. I planned to buy potted roses for the porch and maybe a bird bath for the garden. Nothing extravagant, just pieces of joy I had postponed my whole life. I fixed myself a simple breakfast of oatmeal and tea, sitting by the window while watching the mist roll across the fields. I pictured grandchildren visiting occasionally, laughter in the garden, but always on my terms. No more answering to anyone. No more living in spaces I didn't own. My neighbors had waved when I moved in. Martha, a retired schoolteacher next door, promised to bring fresh vegetables from her plot. The thought of new friendships comforted me. I was no longer just Melissa's mother or Harold's widow. I was Evelyn, a woman with her own home, her own key, and her own peace. As I folded clothes into the cedar-lined closet of the master bedroom, I whispered, "This is where I'll rest. This is where I'll heal." For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Then the phone rang. My daughter's name, Melissa, flashed across the screen. I smiled automatically, expecting her to offer congratulations, maybe even pride that her mother had finally taken a step for herself. She had been skeptical when I mentioned buying a house. "It's a waste of money, Mom," she had scolded. "You should stay near us. Easier for us when we need you." But I answered with warmth anyway. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my voice light. I had no idea that within minutes, the peace I'd cradled so tenderly would be ripped from me. "Mom, get ready." Melissa's voice cut through the line like a drill sergeant. "In an hour, we'll be there with 18 of David's family members. Make food for everyone and get the rooms ready. We're staying 2 weeks." For a moment, I thought she was joking. My knees wobbled, and I gripped the dresser for balance. 18 people? Melissa, I just moved in yesterday. I don't even have enough groceries for myself. "Don't be dramatic, Mom," she replied, her tone brisk and dismissive. "They're your family now. David says his cousins are bringing their kids, and his aunts are so excited about the lake. Your house is perfect. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word pierced deeper than she knew. How many times had I been labeled selfish for the rare occasions I said no? I glanced around at my 2-bedroom house, still cluttered with unpacked boxes. Where exactly did she imagine 18 adults and children would sleep? On the bare wooden floor? As Melissa rattled off demands, clean towels, packed lunches for day trips, enough food for barbecues, my mind drifted back to all the times she had commandeered my life before. After Harold's funeral, when I needed comfort, Melissa had arrived with empty boxes. "You don't need all this old stuff," she'd said briskly, scooping up his books and heirlooms. Without asking, she carried off the gold watch Harold's father had given him, telling me, "It's better if I keep it safe." I had been too numb to protest. When I sold our apartment to buy this house, Melissa insisted I hand her the money. "You don't understand finances," she said with that smug smile David adored. "We'll invest it better." I refused, and she punished me with a month of silence. Now, on my very first day of peace, she was treating my sanctuary like a free resort. "Melissa, please listen," I begged, my voice trembling. "I bought this house for me. It's small. I don't have the money or the space." She cut me off. "Mom, stop. You've always been overdramatic. It's just a house, and family comes first. We'll be there soon. Make sure the sheets are washed." Then she hung up. I stood frozen, the phone buzzing quietly in my hand. Around me, the house no longer felt like a haven. It felt invaded before they had even arrived. My joy evaporated into a hollow dread that curled deep in my stomach. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight now shadowed by fear. I thought of all the times I had been reduced to the family maid, my needs irrelevant, my apartment raided, my refrigerator emptied, my pension eyed like prey. And yet, here I was again, expected to give up my money, my food, even my bed. The clock ticked, cruelly loud. 58 minutes until the storm descended. I whispered into the silence, "What have I done? This was supposed to be mine." I stumbled into the kitchen, still clutching the phone as if it might ring again with Melissa shouting more orders. The refrigerator door groaned when I pulled it open. Inside, 3 eggs, half a gallon of milk, 2 tomatoes, a chunk of cheese, and a bottle of water. My pantry was no better: 1 can of beans, a dented can of tuna, half a bag of rice, salt, pepper, and cooking oil. I pressed my forehead to the cool metal of the fridge door, trying to steady my breathing. 18 people, 2 weeks. How could she imagine I could feed them all? My wallet lay on the counter where I'd tossed it after unpacking. I opened it and counted. $284 left until my pension check next month. I had spent nearly everything on moving expenses and the basic furniture. A sharp ache burned behind my eyes. I thought of the decades of pinching pennies, the countless times I denied myself small comforts, new shoes, dinners out, even the occasional vacation so that Melissa could have dance lessons, class trips, braces, all the things Harold insisted we provide. And now she expected me to empty my last savings for her husband's sprawling clan. I ran my hand over the scarred kitchen table I'd found at a thrift store. It had taken me weeks to sand and paint it, dreaming of quiet breakfasts with coffee and toast while the morning light spilled across my garden. Not of serving it like a buffet counter for ungrateful relatives. My mind spiraled back to the fire sale of my own possessions years earlier. Harold's hospital bills had swallowed my savings, and Melissa had swooped in, offering help that always came with strings. "We'll pay you back, Mom," she said, taking envelopes of cash for David's failed investments. I never saw a cent again. A noise outside snapped me back. A crow landed on the fence, cawing sharply, as if warning me that time was running out. I glanced at the clock. 46 minutes. I opened the cabinet where Harold's old coffee tin sat, still half full of coins I'd been saving for emergencies. I poured them out, the clatter filling the silence. Quarters, dimes, nickels, about $23 worth, my so-called emergency fund. My chest tightened. How had I ended up here again? I had built this house as a sanctuary, yet already I felt cornered. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window-lined face. Gray hair pulled back with a clip, eyes wide with fear. "You wanted freedom," I whispered to myself. "And now you're about to lose it before you even had a chance." The refrigerator hummed, almost mocking me. Empty shelves, empty wallet, and an army of relatives on the way. I grabbed my purse, thinking I could rush to town, buy the cheapest food, somehow stretch it. But then the panic surged again. Even if I did, where would they sleep? On the floor of my living room, on my bed, while I curled on the sofa like a stranger in my own home? 43 minutes. I sank into the chair, clutching my purse to my chest like armor, waiting for the sound of engines that would end the quiet I had barely begun to savor. The low rumble of engines reached me before I saw them. My heart thudded in my chest as 3 oversized SUVs pulled into the narrow driveway like an invading fleet. Doors slammed, voices rose, and suddenly my little sanctuary was drowning in noise. Children tumbled out first, shrieking with excitement as they darted toward the garden I had so lovingly planned to fill with roses and herbs. One boy stomped straight across the small patch where I had planted tomatoes that morning, crushing a tender sprout beneath his sneakers. My throat tightened. Then came the adults, Melissa leading the charge like a general. She didn't even look at me at first. Instead, she raised her arms dramatically. "Isn't this perfect?" she called to David's cousins. "Plenty of space, fresh air, a lake nearby. We'll be so comfortable here." "Mom," she finally turned, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll give up the master bedroom, of course. Emily's baby cries at night and needs space. David and I will take the other bedroom. Everyone else can use the living room. You don't mind, right?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. This was my room, the one I had chosen with care, where I had placed Harold's rocking chair to face the sunrise. The very room where I thought I'd finally rest. David, my son-in-law, patted my shoulder as if I were his assistant. "Don't worry, Mary," he said casually, using my name in that patronizing way. "We'll make it work. You can sleep on the sofa. It'll be cozy for you." Cozy. My stomach churned. Suitcases banged against the porch railing. Coolers were dragged inside without permission, filling my narrow hallway. Someone shouted, "Where's the Wi-Fi password?" Another called, "We'll need towels for the lake." My house was barely a 2-bedroom cottage, but they treated it like a resort villa. As I stood frozen, my mind replayed another invasion years earlier. I remembered David showing up at my apartment with 3 of his friends for a football weekend. "Mom makes the best chili," Melissa had boasted, as if I were staff. I had spent my grocery budget on feeding them, and when I complained about the cost, Melissa had laughed. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. You love cooking for us." Back then, I swallowed my frustration. But now, standing in my own home, watching strangers drag in their luggage and children run wild through my living room, something shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was a small, hot spark deep in my chest. Indignation. Melissa's voice rang out again. "Mom, don't just stand there. Help us bring in the bags." I clutched the spoon I was still holding from earlier, its wooden handle warm in my palm. I didn't move. Not yet. I simply watched as my so-called family took possession of every inch of my freedom. And I knew something had to change. The kitchen felt like a battlefield. I boiled water for rice and pasta, chopping vegetables with frantic hands, sweat trickling down my back. Every clang of the pot reminded me of the clock ticking down. They had arrived with empty stomachs and full expectations, while I had only a few scraps and a knot of dread. I laid out mismatched plates 4, the only set I owned. After that, I resorted to bowls, mugs, even the lid of a pot. My cheeks burned as I carried the first servings into the crowded living room. The food was thin, stretched too far, but it was all I could manage. Noah, David's brother, looked at his plate, frowning at the small mound of rice and watery sauce. "Is this all? No meat? Not even chicken?" I tried to explain. "I just moved in yesterday. I didn't have time to—" David cut me off with a laugh, sipping from a beer he'd pulled from his cooler. "Mary, it's fine. We know you didn't expect so many, but you could have made more of an effort. We're family, right?" His words stung more than any insult. Family. Always the excuse for taking and never giving. From the corner, Melissa was directing traffic. "Mom, Emily, and her baby need the master bedroom tonight. They'll sleep better with space. David and I will take the other bedroom. You can make up the sofa. Everyone else can figure out the living room." I froze. My master bedroom? The bed where I'd placed Harold's old quilt? The window where I'd planned to watch the sunrise each morning? The room I had chosen as mine? Emily plopped her crying baby onto my dining table, fumbling with a diaper. "Mary, we'll also need formula, baby food, diapers, sunscreen, mosquito spray, children's shampoo. I forgot to pack enough for 2 weeks." She scribbled a list on a napkin and shoved it into my hands. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Formula, diapers, laundry detergent, aspirin, even sanitary pads. Each item carried a dollar sign, adding weight to my nearly empty wallet. $200, at least most of what I had left. My chest tightened. The children, restless and hungry, were pulling open cabinets, scattering crackers across the floor. My tomato plants outside had been stomped flat. Someone shouted for more towels, another asked about Wi-Fi. And through it all, Melissa's voice carried like a whip. "Hurry up, Mom. They're hungry. The kids want to swim after dinner. And don't forget, make extra food for the trip back from the lake tomorrow." I looked around at the chaos, my house disappearing before my eyes. My sanctuary was gone, replaced by noise, demands, and disdain. Tears welled, but not from the onions I had chopped earlier. These were tears of humiliation, of rage, of grief for the freedom I had barely tasted. Melissa caught me wiping my cheek and rolled her eyes. "Oh, Mom, don't start. You should be grateful. This is your chance to bond with David's family. Don't ruin it." Grateful. The word rang in my ears like a cruel joke. Grateful to surrender my money, my home, my dignity? I swallowed hard and glanced at the napkin list still crumpled in my hand. The ink was smudged where my tears had fallen. Something inside me cracked, not with noise, but with quiet certainty. I could not go on like this. That night, I lay curled on the sofa, my back aching against the lumpy cushions. The sounds of strangers snoring filled every corner of my house. Babies cried, children ran to the bathroom, adults whispered and laughed as if it were a hotel. My quilt, Harold's quilt, had been taken to the master bedroom for Emily and her baby. I was left with a thin throw blanket that smelled faintly of mothballs. Sleep never came. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. Melissa's orders, David's smug laughter, the endless list of demands written on a napkin that had cost me the last of my dignity. By 5 a.m, I sat up, my bones stiff, my heart pounding. I realized the truth. I had lost control of my life one small yes at a time. Every babysitting favor, every grocery bill I covered, every heirloom Melissa had taken without asking. Every moment I silenced myself to keep the peace. But there was no peace, only exhaustion. The sunrise leaked pale gold through the curtains, reminding me of the freedom I had once imagined in this house. I pulled on my shoes and grabbed my purse, ignoring the chorus of snores around me. My car keys jingled softly, like a secret. I told myself I was going to the supermarket, but as I drove past the edge of town, the thought of buying another cart of groceries with money I didn't have made bile rise in my throat. My wallet held less than $100 now. Feeding 18 people for 2 weeks was impossible. I parked instead in front of a small cafe. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, the smell of fresh coffee wrapping around me like comfort. For the first time in days, I exhaled. A waitress, middle-aged with kind eyes, approached with a pot of coffee. "Rough night?" she asked, reading my face. I hesitated, then nodded. "Family troubles." She poured my cup and leaned in just slightly. Family can be the hardest. Sometimes they're the ones who hurt you most. Her words landed like a stone in my chest. I stared at the steam rising from the cup and realized she was right. My family had been using me for years. Love had become a leash, and I had been choking on it. I sipped slowly, the bitterness grounding me. For the first time, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if I said no? The thought was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I finished the coffee, stood, and walked out of the cafe, not toward the grocery store, but across the street to a small law office I had noticed the day before. The sign read, "Daniel Harris, Attorney at Law." My hands trembled as I pushed the door open, but my voice was steady when the receptionist asked what I needed. "I'd like to talk to someone about setting boundaries with family," I said, "and about protecting what's mine." For the first time in years, I wasn't asking for permission. I was demanding help. Daniel Harris looked nothing like the lawyers I'd seen in movies. No expensive suit, no intimidating desk. Just a middle-aged man with kind eyes, a plain tie, and a bookshelf full of neatly labeled binders. He offered me water, and I realized how parched I felt, how rarely anyone offered me anything without expecting something in return. I told him everything. Melissa's call, the invasion, the shopping lists, the way they'd claimed my master bedroom. My words tumbled out in a rush, my hands twisting the tissue he'd given me. When I finished, the room was silent except for the hum of a small fan in the corner. "Mrs. Walker," he said at last, his voice calm but firm. "What you've described isn't just unfair, it's a form of financial and emotional abuse." The word abuse landed heavy. I'd spent decades excusing it as family duty. To hear it named out loud felt like a mirror I couldn't look away from. He leaned forward. "You own this property outright?" "Yes," I whispered. "Paid in cash. Then you have absolute control over who stays, under what conditions. If anyone refuses to leave when asked, that's trespassing." The idea stunned me. Trespassing my own daughter? Her husband? Could I really see it that way? He continued. "You also have the right to set lodging terms. Food, utilities, laundry. If they're using your home like a resort, you can charge them like one. In fact, I'd recommend drafting a written agreement." He pulled a folder from his desk and began filling out forms. Columns of numbers appeared: daily lodging rates, meal costs, service charges. He even added a clause for damages, pointing out that children destroying plants or property could be billed. I stared at the paper, my heart thudding. "You mean I could hand this to them? And if they refuse? You ask them to leave. And if they don't, you call the sheriff. Simple as that." My breath caught. For years I had believed I was powerless. Now, in black ink on white paper, I saw proof that I wasn't. Daniel looked at me kindly. "Boundaries aren't cruelty, Mrs. Walker. They're protection. True family respects them." As he spoke, another memory surfaced. After Harold's death, Melissa had tried to convince me to sign over a small life insurance policy. "It's better if we manage it for you," she had said, almost snatching the paperwork from my hands. I had refused, sensing something wasn't right, and quietly locked the document in a drawer. Now I realized she hadn't wanted to help me. She had wanted to control me. Daniel must have seen the shift in my expression. "You've been giving without limits for a long time. It's time to change the terms." When I left his office, I carried 2 folders. One held the drafted contract: lodging fees, meal charges, service costs, all neatly itemized. The other held pamphlets about elder financial protection, advice on setting spending limits at the bank, and numbers for local support services. The weight in my purse wasn't just paper, it was power. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking home as someone's mother, someone's maid, someone's endless wallet. I was walking home as Evelyn Walker, homeowner. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was high and my nerves were steady. 3 hours had passed since I'd left, and I knew they were waiting, restless and demanding. Sure enough, when I stepped inside with 2 grocery bags, the living room erupted. "Finally," Melissa snapped from the sofa and scrolling on her phone as if she owned the place. "The kids are starving. Where's the meat for the barbecue?" Paul, one of David's uncles, held up a beer from his cooler. "And the charcoal? We want to grill tonight." "Don't forget the cigarettes," Robert added, smirking as if I were their errand girl. I set the bags down on the kitchen counter with deliberate care. "I bought basics," I said evenly. "Rice, beans, pasta, vegetables. Enough so no one starves." Emily frowned, bouncing her baby on her hip. "But what about the formula and diapers? I gave you a list." "I know," I replied softly, reaching into my purse. My hands no longer trembled. Instead, I pulled out the bank statement Daniel had helped me print. "This is what I have left, less than $300 until next month. In the past 2 days, I've already spent over $500 feeding and preparing for you." The papers passed from hand to hand, faces shifting from disbelief to annoyance. Melissa scoffed. "Mom, stop being stingy. We know you have savings. You just bought this house." "No," I corrected, my voice sharp enough to slice the room's noise. "I had savings. They went into this house, into the roof over your heads right now, into the floorboards your children are stomping across." David leaned back, arms folded. "So what? You want us to pay rent? That's ridiculous. We're family." The word again, family. A shield they hid behind, sharp enough to wound me every time. I reached into my bag again, and this time laid Daniel's contract on the coffee table. The pages fanned out neatly. Itemized charges for rooms, meals, utilities, laundry, damages. Daily rates clearly listed. "Yes," I said calmly. "If you plan to stay here, you will pay lodging fees, just as you would at any hotel. $100 per room, $50 per person per day for meals, $20 for basic services. So far, in 2 days, that totals $2,800. The room went silent. Even the children stopped squabbling. Melissa's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I am. I straightened, my spine no longer bent from years of giving in. You have two choices: sign the agreement and contribute, or leave. Gasps rippled through the group. Noah muttered something under his breath. Emily's jaw dropped. David's smirk faltered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pleading. I wasn't apologizing. I was stating terms. And I could feel the spark in my chest growing stronger. Before anyone could answer, a knock sounded at the open front door. All heads turned. My neighbor Martha stepped inside, carrying a wicker basket overflowing with vegetables from her garden. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, her posture upright and confident. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, scanning the crowded room. I thought I'd welcome my new neighbor with some fresh squash and tomatoes. "Oh my, what a houseful you've got here." Melissa forced a smile, her voice tight. "We're just visiting, Martha." "Family vacation." Martha's eyes twinkled, but her tone carried weight. "Well, isn't that nice? I sure hope everyone's pitching in for groceries. Feeding this many mouths must be costly." Silence. The kind that exposes everything words try to hide. I felt my cheeks flush, but for once not from shame. It was relief. Someone else saw it. Someone else said it. David cleared his throat. "Of course we're helping. We're family." Martha tilted her head, her gaze sharp. "Oh? Because in my day, when you visited relatives, you brought food or slipped money for bills, especially if you had children in tow. That's just good manners." The room grew heavy. Emily rocked her baby faster, avoiding Martha's eyes. Paul busied himself with his beer. Melissa muttered, "Mom doesn't mind. She loves having us here." Martha set the basket firmly on my counter. "Does she? Because from where I'm standing, she looks exhausted. And I don't know about you, but I was raised to treat my elders with respect, not treat their home like a hotel." I swallowed hard. The spark inside me flared brighter. Martha's words gave me something I hadn't had in years back up. Melissa's face hardened. "This is a family matter." Martha smiled sweetly. "Exactly, and real family doesn't exploit each other." She turned to me, her hand brushing my arm gently. "Evelyn, if you need anything at all, you call me. You don't have to handle this alone." Her voice was steady, public, undeniable. My family shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. For the first time, I wasn't the only voice naming the truth. I picked up Daniel's contract from the table and held it high. "You heard, Martha. This isn't love. This is taking. You want to stay? You sign this agreement and contribute. Otherwise, you find somewhere else." The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of entitlement cracking. The air in the living room felt charged, like a thunderstorm ready to break. Papers rustled in my hand as I held the contract steady, my voice steadying with it. David broke first. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This is ridiculous. You can't charge your own family to stay in your house. What kind of mother-in-law does that?" Melissa jumped in, her tone sharp, almost shrill. "Dad would be rolling in his grave if he saw this, Mom. He'd never forgive you for turning on us." The mention of Harold twisted like a knife, but instead of wounding, it hardened me. "Your father," I said slowly, "worked his entire life so I would have security. He would never have allowed anyone to treat me like a servant in my own home." Emily's voice wavered from the dining table, where she was bouncing her baby. "Mary, don't be so cold. We came here to spend time with you. That's what families do." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Spend time with me? Since you walked in, you've done nothing but hand me bills, dirty laundry, and demands. That's not time together. That's exploitation." Noah stepped forward, looming over me with a glare. "You sound unwell. Maybe you need medical help, Mary. This isn't you." I met his stare without flinching. "You're right. This isn't the old me. The old me kept saying yes until I was broke, exhausted, and invisible. That woman is gone." Melissa's eyes filled with crocodile tears. "Do you even hear yourself? You're destroying this family for money. You'll regret this when you're old and sick, alone with no one to help you." I squared my shoulders, heat rushing into my voice. Better to be alone with dignity than surrounded by people who treat me like their maid. The room erupted shouts, protests, overlapping voices trying to drown me out. But beneath the noise, I felt an invisible wall rise around me, shielding me from their guilt games. I raised my hand, palm out. Enough. The room fell, if not silent, at least subdued. I placed the contract flat on the coffee table. Here are your options. Sign the agreement and contribute fairly. Or pack your things and leave. Either way, the free ride ends today. Gasps echoed. Melissa's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. David muttered under his breath, but his smirk had vanished. Emily clutched her baby tighter. I looked around at all of them, my voice calm and unshakable. I'm done being the doormat. Choose. The spark inside me roared into flame. For a long moment, no one moved. The contract lay on the coffee table like a bomb, waiting to go off. Faces shifted anger, disbelief, shame, though most refused to admit it. Paul tried first, smoothing his voice as though he could negotiate. Mary, come on. Be reasonable. We're family. How about we give you something? Symbolic? Say, $50 for the whole stay? I tilted my head. $50 for 20 people, 2 weeks, meals, water, electricity, laundry, and damages? That's less than 20 cents a day per person. You paid more for gas to drive here. The room buzzed with whispers. Melissa's face flushed crimson. Mom, this is embarrassing. Do you realize how this looks? Everyone will say you kicked out your own daughter and her family. I straightened my spine, my voice cutting through the murmurs. What they'll say is that I finally stood up for myself. Robert stepped closer, his tone darker. You're making enemies in your own bloodline. That's not smart, Mary. For a second, the old fear rose, memories of keeping quiet to avoid conflict. But it faded just as quickly. Are you threatening me in my own house? I asked, my tone calm but razor sharp. His jaw tightened. He stepped back. That was the moment it shifted. The power was no longer theirs. It was mine. Melissa's eyes glistened, her voice rising. You'll regret this, Mom. When you're sick, when you're lonely, don't come crawling to us. You're tearing this family apart. I looked her squarely in the eye. No, I'm finally putting it back together the way it should have been. Respectful, fair, and honest. If you can't live with that, you know we're the door island. The children began to sense the tension. One of the little boys tugged at Noah's sleeve. Dad, are we leaving? Noah sighed, muttering curses under his breath. Emily, still clutching her baby, started shoving clothes into a bag. One by one, they gathered their things: coolers, duffel bags, toys scattered across my floor. The house echoed with the chaos of departure. Melissa threw her suitcase shut and turned back to me, her voice shaking with fury. This isn't you. You've let some lawyer or neighbor poison you against your own blood. I stepped closer, calm and steady. No, Melissa. This is me. The real me. The one who's done being used. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the door. David followed, muttering about ungrateful old women. The others trailed after, dragging their bags, slamming the door behind them. And then, silence. No children running, no voices demanding, no coolers cluttering my hall. Just silence. I walked slowly to my bedroom, the master bedroom they had claimed as theirs. My quilt was rumpled, the sheets twisted, but it was still my room. I smoothed the blanket, inhaled deeply, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. That night, I slept in my own bed, and I slept soundly. The house is mine again. Every morning I wake to sunlight spilling through the curtains, not to the chaos of 20 voices demanding food and space. My garden has flourished, roses blooming along the fence, tomatoes and beans climbing strong. Sometimes I sit on the porch with my coffee, watching the sparrows hop across the railing, and I smile. This is what freedom tastes like. 6 months have passed since Melissa and her clan stormed out of here. At first, the silence felt foreign, almost too large. But slowly, I filled it with new sounds: neighbors laughing over potluck dinners, brushes scratching across canvas at my painting class, music drifting from the community center, where I joined a group for women starting over. Martha has become a dear friend. Every Thursday she brings fresh vegetables, and I send her home with cut roses. We joke that we're each other's chosen family. Melissa still calls now and then. The script is always the same. First, a sweet tone. Mom, I just need a little help. Then, irritation. You're really going to say no? And finally, threats. Don't expect us around when you're older. At first, her words left me trembling. But I've learned the power of one simple sentence. I'm sorry, my love, but I can't help with that. I say it calmly. I say it without guilt, and then I hang up. The first time I did it, I cried afterward, not from regret, but from relief. Now, each time, I feel stronger. I realize I never lost Melissa. I lost the illusion that love meant servitude. And in its place, I gained something I never thought possible at my age. Dignity. I've kept Daniel's contract in a folder by the kitchen phone. Not because I plan to use it again, but because it reminds me that I am not powerless. That paper is proof of the day I chose myself. Sometimes, when I water my plants, I think back to the night I slept on the sofa while strangers filled my home. The hollow ache in my chest then was unbearable. Now, standing in the same room filled with sunlight and flowers, I feel whole. I learned family who loves you shows it through respect, not endless demands. I learned generosity without boundaries is just a slow kind of self-erasure. Most importantly, I learned it's never too late, not at 69, not at any age, to reclaim your life. This morning, I brewed real coffee, not the cheap instant kind Melissa once mocked me for. I sipped it slowly, savoring every drop, while the sparrows sang outside. My kitchen was clean, my home was quiet, and my heart was steady. For the first time in decades, I whispered words I finally believed. I am free.